The Atlanta Art Fair was alive with color and movement, stretching across the bustling downtown streets. Booths overflowed with creativity, each showcasing unique pieces crafted by artists of all ages and backgrounds. People wandered leisurely, their conversations blending with the hum of street performers in the distance. Amidst this sea of talent stood a 14-year-old boy named Elias. Elias's booth was small and unassuming, but it held something extraordinary, a painting titled Bridges of Hope. It was a masterpiece, bold, evocative, and deeply emotional. The image depicted hands of all shades reaching across a fractured bridge, their fingers entwining to rebuild it. The colors were vivid, almost alive, pulling viewers into the narrative. It spoke of unity, of resilience, of hope against all odds. Elias himself was a quiet boy, more comfortable behind a canvas than in front of a crowd. He had spent months perfecting this piece, pouring his heart into every brushstroke. His dream wasn't wealth or fame, but simply to have his art seen and understood. As people stopped to admire his work, he greeted them with a shy smile and explained its meaning. Some nodded, touched by his words. Others moved on, dismissive. From across the street, Judith watched him. She was a fixture at these fairs, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper opinions. In her mind, she was a connoisseur of real art, though her taste was rigid, confined to landscapes and portraits that echoed the past. Modern art, especially when created by someone she deemed unworthy, was beneath her notice, or worse, an affront to her sensibilities. Today, her disdain had found a target in Elias. She eyed his booth with a growing sense of irritation. What business did a boy like him have in a space like this? Who did he think he was, drawing attention he didn't deserve? With a scornful sniff, she crossed the street, her heels clicking loudly against the pavement. Elias greeted her with his usual politeness. "Good morning, ma'am. Would you like to hear about my painting?" Judith's eyes narrowed as she scanned his work. "This is yours?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," Elias replied. "I painted all of these. This one," he gestured to Bridges of Hope, "is about overcoming barriers and finding unity." Judith's lips curled into a sneer. "Overcoming barriers," she mocked. "What would a boy like you know about that?" The crowd around them grew quiet, sensing the confrontation. Elias's cheeks flushed, but he stood his ground. "A lot, ma'am," he said softly. "Art helps me express things I can't say out loud." Judith's smirk deepened. "Well, let me tell you something," she said coldly. "Art is about refinement, sophistication, not whatever this is." She waved dismissively at his paintings. The crowd murmured, uneasy with her harshness, but Judith wasn't finished. With a swift motion, she grabbed the edge of Elias's easel and shoved it. The painting toppled to the ground, scraping against the pavement. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Elias dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he picked up his cherished work. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them away, carefully setting the painting back on the easel. His silence was deafening, a quiet act of defiance that resonated with the crowd far louder than words ever could. Judith smirked, satisfied, and turned to leave. But before she could step away, a voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, young man. May I see that painting?" The crowd parted, revealing a man in an immaculate suit. His name was Mr. Howard, a renowned art collector with an eye for extraordinary talent. He had been observing the scene from a distance, his expression unreadable until now. He approached Elias with deliberate steps, his gaze fixed on the painting. Elias hesitated, unsure of the man's intentions, but then nodded. "Yes, sir," he said, stepping aside. Mr. Howard studied the painting closely, his eyes tracing every line and shade. The crowd leaned in, their curiosity mounting. Even Judith lingered at the edge, her arms crossed but her attention unavoidably drawn to the scene. "This is remarkable," Mr. Howard said finally, his voice cutting through the silence. "The emotion, the story, it's extraordinary." The murmurs grew louder. The crowd, initially skeptical of Elias, now looked at him with newfound admiration. Judith's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice rising. It's nothing but childish scribbles. Mr. Howard turned to her, his expression stern. Madam, I've spent decades collecting some of the finest art in the world, and I assure you, this is no scribble. This is the work of a true artist. Judith faltered, her confidence shaken, but Mr. Howard ignored her. He addressed Elias again. Have you ever had this painting appraised? No, sir, Elias said quietly. I've never thought it was worth much. Well, Mr. Howard said with a small smile, I believe you're in for a surprise. Let me take this to an appraiser I trust. I think you'll find its value far greater than you imagine. Elias hesitated, glancing at his painting. It was deeply personal, a piece of himself on canvas. But something in Mr. Howard's demeanor inspired trust. All right, he said softly. The next day, the festival was abuzz with anticipation. Word of the appraisal had spread, and a crowd gathered around Elias's booth, their curiosity palpable. By noon, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Mr. Howard stepped out, holding the painting, and made his way to Elias. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a man in a suit carrying a clipboard. The appraiser's voice rang out clearly as he addressed the crowd. This painting, Bridges of Hope, is a masterpiece. Its narrative and technique are exceptional. After a thorough appraisal, its value is estimated at $2 million. The air seemed to leave the crowd. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathering as people turned to Elias, their expressions shifting from disbelief to awe. Elias himself stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the number. $2 million, he whispered. Yes, Mr. Howard confirmed, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder. Your talent is extraordinary, and this is just the beginning. The crowd erupted into applause. People who had passed Elias by without a second glance now clamored to see his work. Judith, pale and visibly shaken, tried to melt into the background, but her humiliation was impossible to hide. Elias, overwhelmed but steady, addressed the crowd. Thank you, he said simply. Then, looking directly at Judith, he added, You taught me something important. Not everyone will believe in me, but that doesn't mean I should stop believing in myself. The crowd cheered louder, and Judith turned on her heel, disappearing into the throng. Her departure marked the end of one story and the beginning of another, Elias's rise as a celebrated artist. In the weeks that followed, Elias's life transformed. His work was featured in galleries, exhibitions, and publications. Opportunities poured in, including mentorships and scholarships. And though he thrived, he remained grounded, using his platform to inspire others who faced challenges like his. Months later, at the opening of his first solo exhibition, Elias spotted Judith among the visitors. She stood silently before Bridges of Hope, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, she hesitated before approaching. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I was wrong. Elias regarded her for a moment before nodding. Thank you for coming. That night, as Elias stood beneath a sky full of stars, he felt a sense of peace. His journey had been painful, but it had brought him here, to a place of purpose, where his art could speak louder than any words ever could. And for Elias, that was more than enough.